from government. That's what he said. Who provides subsidies?
Well, he might consider whether NGO support for communities, whether he might count them as subsidies. But I don't think it's the official definition of subsidies, right?
As local community.
So, as well as local community support or resource conservation. Okay. So we're not just focusing on the commercial aspect or the conservation aspect, but also the...
Also community.
Just add that in. Yeah, and that's always the balance between, satisfying to get past the reviewer hurdle without screwing up your manuscript. And it's easy because, yeah. That's why every time you add something in here, you got to say, okay, whoever reads this will never ever know about this, right? So it needs to be consistent and logical flow, right? And that's why sometimes you got to add explanations in from this, and it sometimes makes it really problematic. The only good thing is the word limit is usually out the door. And if the editor has an issue with it, he then comes back to you. And I had one case where I addressed all the reviewer comments. And then the editor said, yep, that makes sense. I accept the paper. Now in order to meet the word limit, take all of it out again. And most of it had to be taken out again. Yeah. It was an editorial decision. I said, okay. Not all of it, but a lot of it had to be taken out.
At the end, the editor has the last word.
Yeah. He's the determinant, right? And then you might get reviewers who get really upset by it, but it was the editor's decision.
We know then who the reviewer are?
No, I don't. The editors do, but that's what the confidential part of it usually
But
is.
some are like when...
Yes, some journals have a semi-open review or an open review. I don't like those. I like total blind review. Okay, good morning. So, 3 topics today that I want to cover in the next 40 minutes or so. Who knows what IUU is? Not IOU, but IUU. Anyone else? You're accumulating too many bonus points. Bastard, yes, you're right. Yes, absolutely. I was hoping for all sorts of guesses, but yes, you're right. You get 100 bonus points. Okay, so it's illegal, unreported, and unregulated. Some people say illegal, unregulated, unreported, but the official definition is the other way around. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated. Okay? So, you need to think carefully about what that means, okay, and what the actual definition is. And therein lies the problem, as I'm going to explain. So illegal fishing is fishing in violation of the laws of a fishery. So there could be either the jurisdiction in a state, in a country. So if the rock lobster fishery here, a fisherman uses more pots than he's allowed to or not, you could deem that part to be illegal. Okay. And with regards to fisheries in the high seas, it's based on the regulation by that RFMO that has jurisdiction over that fishery. Okay, so Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, for example, has jurisdiction over large pelagic fisheries, tuna, and so on, and they have rules. And so if you fly the flag as a fisher, fly the flag of a country that is a member of that RFMO, you are obliged, on behalf of your country who agrees to it, to abide by those rules. If you don't, you're acting illegally. Unreported fishing is basically anything that's unreported to either the national authority or to the relevant RFMO. Okay? And then we get unregulated fishing, and that's the trickiest one. That's kind of the catch-all phrase in this. So, if you have a fishing vessel that has no nationality, and believe me, that exists, you are an unregulated fishing vessel. If you're also fishing, for example, in the high seas, for tuna in the Indian Ocean, but you're flying the flag of a country that is not a member of the IOTC, you're an unregulated fishing vessel. It doesn't mean you're illegal, you're just unregulated. Okay? And a key unregulated fishing activity at the moment is fishing for squid, especially in the Indian Ocean and in parts of the Pacific, and it's a huge fishery. Okay? But there is no fisheries management organization that deals with squid or cephalopods in high seas waters. Within EEZs, each state has jurisdiction over the squid resources, but not in the high seas. So, for example, China has a massive squid fishing fleet that is roaming the world ocean, with mass concentration of fishing in the northwest Indian Ocean, basically off Oman, between Oman and India, but in high seas waters. It's an unregulated fishery, so it's, in a way, it's an IUU fishery, but according to international law, it's perfectly legal. They don't have to report to anything other than to their government, depending on what their government deems they have to report, but they don't have to report to anyone else. But that fleet also fishes in the Pacific, or parts of that fleet, plus other vessels that only fish in the Pacific. You might have heard of this whole thing, the massive Chinese fleet, 500 odd vessels massing around outside Ecuador, Galapagos Island waters, fishing for squid and sharks and other stuff. And then that fleet moves south, fishes in the high seas water just outside of Peru, Chile, goes down, goes into the Atlantic and fishes off Argentina for squid. Okay? It's a massive fleet of IUU vessels. They are legal, but they're unregulated because they're fishing for squid in high seas waters. Okay? Yeah.
Why is there no regulation? I mean, why does no one implement that if it's such a problem?
Because there is no, the international community has not agreed on a regional fisheries management organization for squid. Because until about 8 years ago, it wasn't a big deal, squid fishing. It is possible that over the next decade or so, they will create an RFMO. But that all depends. And if countries like the big fishing countries involved in it, Taiwan, China, and so on, if they want that. Okay, and they might simply say, no, don't need that. High seas is open high seas. We can handle that nationally. And then they block it at left, right, and center. Okay? Every action in high seas has to be unanimous by has to be global community come together. Right? Only one player says no, nothing happens. Okay? However, the countries that are impacted by it, such as Ecuador for the Galapagos and Peru and Chile, they are taking actions to make sure that nothing goes into their EEZ. So they send their navy out. Whenever this fleet comes, they send their navy out and patrol the boundary. They arrest vessels, they have harassments with vessels, they're being harassed by fishing vessels. It's a very, very intense action during that time. Okay? So, we have three terms here. And that's why there's a problem. Because there's confounding within this term. Because it mixes the question of whether something is legal with the fact, are they reporting? And reporting what to whom based on what they have to report, right? And around the management mandate, as we just discussed with squid. That makes IUU as a term really problematic. Because if you look at illegal, so you may be in a situation where you're not allowed to fish in EEZ, but you go in there anyway, so you're fishing illegally. But the data of your catch, you're actually reporting to your national country, right? So I don't like harping on China, but I will have to because China is the world's biggest fishing country. So in the waters of Argentina, a certain time of the year, the Chinese perfectly legally go and fish for squid in high seas waters just outside the EEZ. Right? And it's one of the most lucrative fishing fields, fishing areas for squid. But then there are some vessels that sneak into the Argentinian EEZ at night because there's squid in there that the Argentinians aren't fishing, so the vessels go in and fish it, right? So at that point they become illegal. But the catch they take, they might report to China, right? So Are they IUU? Yes, because in that moment they're fishing illegally, the moment they cross the line, but they're still reporting. Okay. On the other hand, they may go the whole hog, they may fish illegally in an EEZ, and they don't report it to its flag country. That's particularly the case if your vessel flies a flag that's not really a big fishing country. You might have heard of the term flag of convenience. Who has heard of the term flag of convenience? What does it mean? What does it represent?
You just register your boat where in the country that has the easiest regulations.
Yes, absolutely. So most countries have what's called vessel registries. And this register applies certain rules if you want to fly the flag of that country on your vessel. Okay. Some are very strict, for example, Australia and US. Some are very slack, such as Panama, Liberia, Kiribati, Tuvalu, Vanuatu. They're basically willing to sell their flag to any vessel, and they impose few restrictions. These restrictions might be reporting restrictions, they might be taxation restrictions, they might be safety restrictions. Okay? So if you flag your vessel to Panama, no one's going to inspect your safety equipment, which saves the owner a lot of money. Okay? And so you might be flying, you might own, the fishing company that owns the vessel might be Australian, but they register the vessel in Panama to save money, and therefore they're a Panamanian fishing vessel. And theoretically, Panama has a responsibility, legal responsibility for the actions of that vessel anywhere in the world, including the requirement to report catch data to FAO, because that's not Australian catch, it's Panama catch. That's what's called flag state responsibility. So in that case, if Panama, of course, doesn't report this, because it probably doesn't even know that your vessel fishes for squid in the Indian Ocean, because the register in Panama, of course, doesn't talk to the government or the fisheries manager, it's purely a business transaction. Most of these reflagging happen for in the trade, so the maritime trade vessels. That's why you find so many vessels that are flagged to Panama and Liberia and the Marshall Islands. These are all flag of convenience. It's cheap to register a vessel there. Okay? So in that case, it's illegal and unreported. So when we look at the term unreported, the same thing applies. So you may not be reporting your catch, so it's unreported, and it's taken illegally, as we just had a previous case. So both terms apply. But your catches may be unreported, but perfectly legal. For example, the Australian recreational fishery. It's an unreported fishery, because recreational fishers are not required to report on the catch. So Australia's recreational fisheries is an IUU fishery. You try to say that here in Australia, and everyone, including the managers, they'll lop your head off and say, no, it's not. Because it is legal. So you see that there's some confounding in this. Okay. Okay, and with unregulated, so they may report catches or they may not. They may abide by management rules and regulations in the law of by someone, their flag state, or they may not. Okay, so it's a real hodgepodge and it's really problematic. Okay, so be aware of this when you come across this term. So my recommendation, and that's what I always try to do, is wherever possible try to avoid the term IUU, okay, and rather use the individual components if you're clear that you're talking about something that's illegal or something that's unreported or something that's unregulated. Okay, and define what you mean by it, because different people in different jurisdictions look at each of those three terms differently, have a different legal definition of it. Okay. These days, however, IUU is basically mainly used for illegal activity related to high seas and EZ fishing, okay, such as pirate fishing, which is basically unregulated fishing, right? Or foreign incursions into EEZs. if what happens in Argentina and also in the Galapagos Islands when some of the Chinese fleet go inside the EZ. Okay, some of it is inadvertent, and it can always happen. You set a fishing gear, you set your long line, and it happens to drift. And it drifts inside the EZ. When you retrieve it, theoretically you're illegal. But usually management agencies, when they detect that and they approach you, like the Navy, whatever, and then you say, I set it outside, I'm just trying to retrieve it, and now we'll leave immediately, and they usually let you go. Okay? So it all depends how you respond. Just when the police pulls you over for speeding. Right? If you start an argument with them, you get a ticket. If you're polite to them, you may be able to talk your way out of it. Okay? So there is this legal conundrum around this term. Okay? But it's a very powerful term. That's why the media loves it and politicians love it. Okay? And so sometimes I also, in my writing, I have to use it, but I usually try to then explain what I mean by it. Okay? Or I just use it to encompass the whole conundrum of, is it legal? What do you mean by reported? Is it unregulated? Okay. So just be wary of that. So that's it for IUU, for the first of the three topics. Any questions on this, on IUU at this point? No? Okay, let's move on. What does DWF stand for? No? Distant water fishing. Good. Wow, you guys are all read up. Good. A couple of years ago, when I first started this unit, I put this slide up and I asked it. I had a very cheeky student in the class. He gave me a hard time throughout, but very cheekily and very joyfully. He said, yeah, I know what it means. He was sitting somewhere in the back yelling it. It's Dirk's worldview on fisheries. All right. So I said, yes. Perfect. You're getting bonus marks. I have to talk to the university about bonus marks. I have to figure out if there's actually a way of doing it perfectly legitimately. All right, so yes. Now, it actually means distant water fishing. Usually the F doesn't stand for fleets. Also, sometimes it's also as distant water fleets, but that's misleading because any vessel that travels a long distance is a distant water fleet vessel, right? But DWF refers to fishing. So distant water fishing, which means if you mean the fleet, you got to say DWF fleet. Okay? And here we have to be very clear about whose definition we use. Because I'm being honest, right up front, the internationally accepted definition differs from the one that the Sea Around Us uses with all their data work. And I'm going to explain that. So internationally, the definition means fishing outside of your own EZ. Okay? So that could be, in our case, 200.5 nautical miles off the coast of Perth. You're officially in the high seas with your Australian vessel. You are distant water fishing. Okay? Just off the edge of the EZ, or fishing in Indonesian waters would be considered distant water fishing in the commonly international accepted definition. But we modified this definition, right? So we bring in the FAO areas. That was purely for database purposes, to simplify our database work. So what we say, distant water fishing, is if you fish, if a country or the vessel with a flag from a country fishes in an FAO area other than your flag country's home FAO area. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So Australia, with regards, let's just focus on the Indian Ocean. The home FAO area for Australia is FAO area 57. In the Pacific, it would be 81 as well and 71. Okay, so there's three home FAO areas for Australia. So according to the Sea Around Us data definition for distant water fishing, any Australian vessel that fishes in 51, i.e. in the Western Indian Ocean, is part of the distant water fishing fleet of Australia. Okay? Because it's not the home FAO area. The same if Australian vessels fish anywhere here or anywhere here except for 81, right? Because 81 is actually home FAO area. But 77, 87, 67. Basically any FAO area that doesn't touch the territory of your home country or being the flag that your vessel flies. Okay? Because it's the flag state that has reporting requirement. If an Australian vessel registers as being flying the flag of Madagascar for whatever reason, okay, taxation reasons, cost reasons, whatever, right? Then, however, if they fish in 51 flying the flag of Madagascar, Madagascar has reporting requirement. Whether it really happens or not is a different question. But they have reporting requirements, and then this is no longer distant water fishing. Okay, so that's the concept behind it. But any Australian vessel that fishes right out here or down here in 57, according to Sea Round, is not defined as distant water fishing fleet because they're fishing in their home FAO area. Okay, it'll become hopefully a little bit clearer when I talk about the third topic later on. But we modified the definition based on what FAO area, what spatial area that the fishing occurs. Same for Indonesia. If they fish, they have a big fishing fleet that fishes off Perth's water every year, about 400 or 500 kilometers southwest of Perth, probably for southern bluefin tuna and other temperate water tunas. According to the international definition, that's Indonesia's distant water fishing fleet, and Indonesia talks about that fleet as their distant water fishing fleet. But in the sea around us, we don't officially define this as distant water fleet because it's the home FAO area. Okay, so there's a little bit of a confounding there. We've got to be careful what we mean by that. Okay, and the problem, of course, with distant water fishing is who and where and what has responsibility. Okay, so if any fleet, no matter what EZ they fish in, the flag state has responsibility for that vessel. However, very often, if a foreign vessel fishes in Australia, Australia also wants to know what they're catching, because usually access agreements, negotiated payments are involved in this. And so FAO sometimes gets reports from Indonesia about fishing in Australian waters, and Indonesia is supposed to say, well, you know, we had some of our vessels caught 2,000 tons of XYZ in Australian waters, legally with a permission. Okay. But Australia will also report to FAO, oh, by the way, we know that Indonesia, based on this agreement, went and caught 2,500 tons. And so FAO then's got to figure out which number is the right one to use. Okay. Right. And because management requirement rests with the EZ owner, with the national government, that can lead to reporting challenges. Okay. Whereas in the high seas, it's obviously only the flag state, the country whose flag you're flying, who has responsibility for management, okay, as well as reporting. However, sometimes RFMO mandates apply. Okay, so let's take the case of Panama. If you flag your vessel to Panama because it's cheaper, and so you run your fishing vessel as a Panamanian fishing vessel, but Panama happens to be a member of the IOTC, I don't know if they are, so I'm making this up right now, then you, as the fisher, have to comply by Panamanian laws, but also by the RFMO mandate. If not, you're acting illegally. So if the mandate says, oh, you are limited to certain fishing hours or certain gear lengths or whatever, you have to comply to that, okay, with that, okay? That brings up the next thing. These distant water fleets, fishing fleets, very often want to access other EZs, okay? Because that's why they go there, because most fishing happens in EZ, because EZs cover the continental shelf waters, which are the productive parts of the ocean. Okay, 90% of ocean productivity in terms of fisheries catch productivity occurs on continental shelves. So, how do they gain access to EZs? Okay, there is access agreements. Okay? And initially it was mainly that these are official agreements that go country by country. So, if Spain wanted to access the waters of Ghana in West Africa, theoretically Spain, or in the case of Europe, the European Union, negotiates an access agreement for European vessels to Ghana. Okay? And that involves who is allowed to come, what kind of vessel, what kind of gear, for how long, for how much, and how much is the European Union going to pay for them. And then the question, of course, is, are these agreements made public knowledge or not? With regards to EU access agreements, yes, they are. There's a website where the EU posts all their access agreements with all details in them. Okay? But China also negotiates a lot of access agreements, as does Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and so on. And many of those are not made publicly available. Okay? Particular Asian countries very often say, no, these access agreements, even if we as a state do it, they're business confidential. If the host country, Ghana in this case, wants to release it, they can do it, but we won't. Okay? Which makes it really, really difficult to find out if anyone sees a Taiwanese fishing vessel in Ghana, fishing in Ghana, to figure out, are they here legally or not? Do they have an agreement with Ghana or not? Okay? Increasingly, however, and that's a real problem, these agreements are done B2B, business to business. So a fishing company from Taiwan or from China negotiates with a fishing company or some resource stakeholder in Ghana. And neither government ever finds out about it. And it's increasingly becoming a problem because they very often happen on a daily basis, even hourly basis. Oh, you allow us to fish in your waters on your quota for 2 hours and then we disappear again. And the governments never find out. It's a real problem. Okay? And then there is something that's been known for a long time, which are called joint venture operations. Okay? And it's basically when a big fishing company says, we really want to fish in Ghanaian waters, but we don't want to pay lots of fishing access fees as a foreign fleet. So what they do instead, they create a small business in country, in Ghana. They hire a local, some businessman, to be the figurehead of that company. Right? And then they simply transfer all their assets, all their vessels to this joint venture. But there are backroom agreements between the business owner and you that actually they're only a figurehead and they're getting paid 50, 100,000 a year when you take all the profit out of it. That way you get access to an EZ without having to negotiate with the government. You simply set up a small business. Okay? And then there is the reflagging that I also already referred to, which is a cost-cutting measure. Plus countries, fishing companies very often do flag hopping. They change their flag on a regular basis to suit where they're fishing. Because countries have agreements with other countries. And so you might say, I really want to fish for squid in Argentina, but Taiwan doesn't have agreement with Argentina squid fishing. But its neighbor Uruguay does. I reflag my vessel to Uruguay for the squid fishing season and I can access Argentinian waters. When I'm done, I flag back to my home country. This flag hopping happens a lot. And you can see all of that really makes it very complicated, not only to control and manage it, but also to simply the accountability of who catches what, when, and where. Okay? And the biggest problem is that internationally the standard is, and all countries had agreed to that the flag state has responsibility for all the action of their vessels flagged to them, and all the reporting requirements. But you really think Kiribati knows if a vessel flagged to Kiribati fishes in the Atlantic for bluefin tuna and cares if that catch is reported or not? Okay, yeah.
Is the temporary reflagging legal?
Yes. As long as you register in that country on their register. You can't simply pull up a flag. Then you're a pirate vessel. But if you are on the official shipping register of that country, yes. And there are shipping agents that specialize in that. They spend the whole day simply reflagging a vessel from here to there, and then a month later back to there. Right? And in some registry, like US and Australia, it's a very complicated process. In Panama, it's easy. The fishing agent calls up the registry and said, I've got a vessel, it's a ton vessel, name is so-and-so, length is so-and-so, it doesn't have an IMO number, it's a merchant vessel, how much does it cost? $50, bang, registered, done. Paperwork done, fax the paperwork or email it these days, and all of a sudden, and then you can fly the Panamanian flag. You have a question? No? Okay. All right. So all of this really, really causes problems. And this whole issue of flag state responsibility raised its head quite a while ago when some Pacific Island countries, mainly egged on and encouraged by distant water interests from Asian countries, especially Japan and Taiwan in those days, wanted to change the international standard. And they said, no. All catch taken within our EZ waters is our catch. We don't care what flag the vessel flies. It caused a huge uproar in international accounting when all of a sudden countries like Kiribati and Papua New Guinea said, there's a 200,000 tons of tuna caught in our waters. It's all Papua New Guinea catch, despite the fact that 99% of it is caught by vessels that are actually owned elsewhere. Okay, it was a big issue, right? And it's raising its head again, and that's why this link here for a short editorial in the Maritime Executive, you should read that. Because there's now a pushback to try to tackle particularly the flag of convenience situation. We say, wait a minute, Panama has responsibility, so if any vessel flying the Panamanian flag causes any violation, okay, someone should start suing Panama government because they have responsibility over that vessel. Okay. Same with an Australian flagged vessel runs down a ship in Bangladesh and kills people who drown. Australia has responsibility for this vessel, legal and diplomatic responsibility for that vessel. Okay. So go and read that editorial. It's not very long. So the international community has been trying to do things about the illegal part of distant water fishing. Okay, so they're trying to tackle some of the real bad things that go on. And they finally, after long negotiations, they passed the Port State Measures Agreement. Okay. And it's targeted at, it's trying to target the worst of the illegal and unregulated activities. Okay. And what they want to do is, because they can't tackle particularly anything going on in the high seas, they can't tackle that. They instead say, okay, but at some point these vessels got to come to port to unload and to refuel. And then they're within a national jurisdiction. So the more countries they get to sign on to this, the more they can prevent those vessels actually using shore services. Okay. And there's been some success with that. They've been able to forbid access to ports. There was the first case that I became aware of was when in Liberia, I think it was in Liberian waters, there was a boarding party from the Liberian Navy that boarded a vessel that was flagged, I think, to Taiwan, or no, to South Korea. And they discovered that the official fishing license they carried, that was supposed to allow them to fish in Liberian waters, was actually forgery. Okay? And so at that point they said, okay, you will have to make port in Liberia until we sort this out. Right? But the moment the officers left the ship to get back on his smaller patrol boat, the South Korean vessels just turned around and went into high seas. All right? And so Liberia then contacted a network of people, including this, to say, okay, vessel so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so flagged to South Korea, violated a certain rule, don't allow it access to port. And that was in the early days of this agreement, and it was basically the port officers called the next port officer, which was much faster than going via governments, because governments, very often neighboring countries in Africa, they hate each other. But the port officers, they talked to each other and said, oh, you know, under the disguise of the Port State Measures Agreement, which hadn't passed yet, but all the port officers in West Africa were aware of it and they wanted it to make the life easier. And so this vessel could not access any port, and it had to steer all the way around South Africa in the Indian Ocean. Starting running low on fuel. The South Korean fishing company had to send a fueler, a transshipment vessel, to refuel that vessel because it couldn't get any fuel or offload its catch. And at the same time, NGOs worked in South Korea to embarrass the South Korean government. Why do you allow this? You have flag state control of it. Why do you allow an illegal activity? And then finally South Korea, after days and days and days, or maybe even a couple of weeks, finally forced the fishing company to pay the fine to Liberia, a couple $1 million. Everything was okay. Okay. So that led to this port measure agreement. Okay. And it is the only internationally effective tool we currently have, but not all countries have signed on to it. But it's making things harder. Okay, any questions on this before I get to the third topic? No? Okay. So the third topic is a sea rounder data specific topic. Because you need to understand, have a really good understanding of the data that you've actually accessed and some of its ramifications and limitations. So the data you download has three what we call catch data layers. Okay. The first one is domestic fishing within the EEZ waters. Okay, so that's Jamaica fishing in Jamaica. Okay, does not include Jamaica fishing in Dominican Republic. Okay, and that's the data layer that's reconstructed where we have detailed add-ons of unreported catches. Okay, and that's also what is the main target of the reports and the papers associated that you find on the website. Okay. Data layer 2, however, is fishing outside your own EEZ, i.e. the international definition of distant water fishing, international, okay? Except for all large pelagic species that are managed under tuna RFMO mandate, okay? So if Jamaica bottom trawls in the Dominican Republic, that's layer 2. If Jamaica fishes for tuna in the Atlantic, that's not data layer 2, okay? The reason why we differentiate that is because RFMO creates their own data sets. Tuna fleets report to RFMO and their home country. And both of them report to FAO, and then FAO sorts out what is what. But we have trouble getting both data sets, so we had a bit of an accounting problem. So that was our way around it. Okay? And this foreign fishing for anything other than large pelagic is currently not reconstructed. Okay, so our foreign fishing data is still only the officially reported. And then data layer 3 is all fishing for large pelagics that's under the RFMO tuna mandates. Okay, because they have their own data set. Okay, and we do a few things with it, and I'm going to talk about that. It's described in Coulter et al. Right, and the first actual reconstruction for this, for the Indian Ocean, was just published this year by Christina, who's going to lecture about it next week. So, layer 1, we've already covered. Okay, so just as a refresher, that's Spain fishing inside Spain's EEZ. No matter if it's Spanish EEZ in Atlantic or in the Mediterranean, that's data layer 1. And the data included landed and discarded catches by all fishing sectors, small scale and large scale, and obviously whether it's reported or unreported. But it excludes all Spanish fishing in the rest of Europe. Okay, so Spain fishing in France is not included in this. That's not data layer 1. Because it's data layer 2. Okay. However, there we had to think very carefully, how do we obtain those data? Okay. And that's where our definition of distant water fishing fleets come into it, because the FAO areas came into play. So any data that's not in the home FAO area, our layer 2 catch data at the moment is simply what the country reports to FAO. Okay, so Spain fishing in the Indian Ocean, we simply take the FAO data. Okay, whereas in the home FAO area, we do a little subtraction game. We basically say, okay, so Spain in the Northeast Atlantic, which is where Spain is, reports this to FAO. Then we look at the catch reconstruction we had determined that Spain, within Spain, reports that much. And so if you subtract that from that, and the rest of it, we say, well, this must be Spain fishing elsewhere in that FAO area. Okay, so it's a little subtraction game. We do add a little bit discards, but not much, right? And that whole thing is a little bit of a mess. So layer 2 are in urgent need of detailed reconstructions. Okay, and a key example of that is Spanish trawlers in the Indian Ocean, which is this, versus in European waters outside the Spanish EZ, which is that. Okay, and by definition, because it's outside fishing outside your home EZ, it's industrial only. There's no small scale. And layer 3, the large pelagics, as I said, depends on the tuna RFMOs, and there's 5 of them around the world. Okay, one that covers the Atlantic and Mediterranean, one the Indian Ocean, one the Western and Central Pacific, one the Eastern Pacific, and then the CCSBT, which is the only one that is actually single species focused. Only southern bluefin tuna, nothing else. Okay, and it spans multiple oceans. It basically covers the entire distribution of that species. And how do we deal with that data? Well, each RFMO has a reporting requirement. So if you fish for tuna and you're a member of an RFMO, you have to report to the RFMO as well as to your own country. That's what I said, why there's 2 data streams. And usually most RFMOs, they have 2 data sets. One is called nominal and one is called spatial. So the nominal is basically you report to the RFMO, you being the vessel and therefore the flag state, the catch in a year by the taxon, what fishing country flag you are, and what gear you use. Okay. However, a subset of these reports also provides spatial data. So it's again catch by year, by taxon, by flag, by gear, and by RFMO reporting, statistical reporting area, which we call tuna blocks, and I'm going to show them in a moment. Okay. However, this is not complete. So the spatial data is a subset of the nominal data. So this data is contained within that, but not all of this data is like that. Okay? And so the tuna blocks that they report the spatial subset data in are also highly variable. They go from areas that are 20 by 20 degrees all the way down to 1 by 1 degree cells. But that varies by country, by year, by taxon, by gear, by vessel. Some vessels are lazy, they just report it by 10 or 20 degrees, or they want to hide something, so they report it by 20. Others are very specific. So it's a huge, the spatial data is a huge hodgepodge of data. Okay? But we use that. So what we do, we call this harmonization of the large pelagic tuna data. And what we do is we use the spatial information contained in the spatial subset data to spatially allocate the entire nominal data. Okay? So we do that for if you have a match between flag, year, taxon, and gear. Let's say there's 1,000 tons reported. Then you look in the spatial data for exactly the same combination, and you find out about 500 tons of that 1,000 have spatial information. Then we assume the other 500 tons is only the nominal for the same parameter combination, has the same spatial distribution, because we don't know any different. Okay? And that allows us to actually spatially pre-assign tuna data out from, this is in the Indian Ocean or by the 2 FAO areas, into at least tuna blocks. Before we feed this data into the sea around us spatial allocation, which then puts that within half-degree cells, the sea around us half-degree cells, but only within the designated tuna block. It never moves data outside of it. Okay? And that's described in Coulter et al. Right? And now Christina has done the first reconstruction. The data quality of that has been improved, but it still goes through the same process. Okay? And so these are the 3 core references related to layer 3 into tuna. We did some earlier work on distant water fishing, particularly the role of China. We were commissioned by the European Parliament to do that. There's a huge report. and then we turned it into a paper. And so that was the paper. The paper is only 14 pages long, but the whole online supporting materials is 70 pages long, because a lot of the material had to go in there to document what we did. And I don't have much time, so I'm going to skip most of that. But basically what it's based on is that we realized that what China reports as caught in the Northwest Pacific FAO area, and that's the rest of the world, doesn't match what countries report, what the other countries in Northwest Pacific actually report. So there's a mismatch, so it can't be true. And so we figured out that actually China fishes in almost every country in the world at that time, other than the North Atlantic. Okay? And so there is evidence that they're there. And so we used all that evidence using some solutions, and you can look up what a Fermi solution is, to not only find out how many vessels, Chinese vessels, there might have been fishing in each of those EZ, but how much they must have caught to have a minimum economic viability. Okay? Right? And so what we found out, that they fish in at least 90 odd countries. There's over 3,000 vessels, Chinese vessels, and they catch about 4.5 million tons per year. Okay? But they only report 360,000 a year to the FAO. So we're not saying that China doesn't report the catch. We're saying it's spatially misreporting it. It's reporting it for an area, for this area, Northwest Pacific, which is the FAO area, rather than where it's actually caught. And it's most likely because Chinese data collectors go to the port, the vessel arrives, they simply, yeah, you're offloading here, so this is this FAO area, so they report it as being caught where the port is, where they offload it. Okay? Most of it is caught in African waters, right? Especially in West Africa, and I think I've alluded to that before, where Chinese is really a big fishing entity, right? And the whole squid fishery that I alluded to earlier, most of it occurs here, as well as here, and then down the whole coast, all the way around here, seasonally. That's the squid fishery. That was not covered in this. And we also did some other work where we looked at distance pattern, where basically we could show that in the past, it was only a small number of countries that actually travel a long way with their fleet to fish. Okay? Most other countries stay much closer to home for fishing. There's a few that used to go a long way, but then changed their tune over time. Former Soviet Union, because it basically collapsed, right? And Japan, because it realized during this time it was cheaper to buy fish than to go fish and catch it, right? Norway, this little pickup here, Norway, why Norway goes a lot further is purely because of one fishery, and that's the fishery for krill. And it sends ships to Antarctica to catch krill to feed to its aquaculture ventures in Norway. I think that's about it. We're done. Yeah. Any questions? Nope. All right, let's have a break, and then we'll start again.